I'm so pleased everybody came out in the cold weather for this. And I know it will be worthwhile. I'm Sharon Strober. I'm the current chair of Good Systems, which is a research project sponsored by our Vice President for Research Office. And Good Systems is a cluster of research projects looking at AI and its intersections with ethics. That tends to be pretty broad. And we have several research projects being sponsored under that umbrella. We also have several speakers coming in periodically, and we were so very pleased to have the people who are here today to talk about AI and art in particular. And we're looking forward to doing more in that particular space. We're an interdisciplinary group, and our focus is on defining and evaluating and building AI systems, speaking about the Good Systems project. And we couldn't help but notice, as everybody seems to be noticing, the impact of generative AI. So we were especially interested in what that might portend for visual arts, for art more generally, for design, and for all the related endeavors. Now, of course, ChatGPT is around here. I don't know if we've drifted to ChatGPT or not. Well, okay. Okay, so today we have just an amazing group of people to talk about these kinds of issues, and we'll talk about what some of the benefits of generative AI could be, maybe some of the harms or some of the sticking points, how our ideas about art and design might evolve, or how they're evolving and are challenged right now. So I want to start off by thanking all of our panelists in particular for being here and spending some time with us. We have about an hour to hear from the panelists. We'll open it up for questions from all of you at the end. And I thought we're going to proceed in the order that folks are seated here. And I thought I would read the bios of our participants before each one begins. And I'm going to apologize up front for your bios because, boy, I could not do justice to the accomplishments of this group. I strongly, if you haven't already looked up what each person on this panel has done, I encourage you to do that. It's phenomenal work and phenomenal ideas. Again, we're so pleased to have everybody here. So we'll start with Corey. Corey B. is an associate professor and program director at our School of Architecture, and he's also the founder of OTA+, which is an architecture design and research office that specializes in developing and using current and new and emerging digital technologies that figure in the design and fabrication of buildings and building components and experimental installations. I hope he'll talk a little bit about an event that is upcoming on Friday, kind of related to this too. But with that brief bio, I'll turn it to Corey.
All right, thank you, Sharon and Stacy, for inviting me. It's really great to be here with everyone and share what we're up to. Maybe I'll quickly do a plug because I don't have it in my slides, but yeah, on Friday at the School of Architecture, we have a symposium called Architecture After AI, and there's 80 different exhibitors, 6 speakers, both artists and architects and theorists coming in. First panel is from 10 to 12:30, second one is 1 to 4:30. Come on by, open to the public, School of Architecture down the road. Okay, so my experience in AI began actually in earnest, I'd say about 3 years ago when the pandemic began. I was part of the UT task force here, and we were looking at when the pandemic began to figure out how we would deal with moving online and how we deal with this issue of not being present in physical space. And so I was looking at ways in which to create places that people could go to and still feel like they're part of campus. And we were looking at machine learning actually with my students for how we might do that. And machine learning, just for those who aren't super familiar with it, it's essentially a data set. Typical AI has data sets of millions, sometimes billions of different things, or in this case, images. You then have different models, which are ways of exploring the AI or the data set. So you might have like style transfers. You've probably seen like draw my portrait in the style of Van Gogh. That would be AI doing a style transfer of Van Gogh to your portrait. And then interpolation. So it takes all that data and interpolates each of those images and creates hundreds of additional images that exist sort of between them in this kind of latent space. So that's how machine learning was. We used it to create new organizational structures for cities, in this case the campus here at UT. We looked at existing city systems like Chicago, Barcelona, and started to combine those with images from biology, microorganisms, to see what those organizational patterns might mean in terms of city organization here on campus. So we did a digital model of campus that people could explore. It's actually a game. It's built in Unity. You could walk around. You could actually change the weather and the time of day. And so that was really for people who couldn't visit the university otherwise. They would come and explore this game. So my students took it from there and actually developed a new set of architecture buildings to exist on campus, which are all the white ones. And it produced these really kind of wild results, and each student kind of developed a part of the project. So that was until this last summer, where diffusion-based text-to-image AI really exploded. That's the Midjourney, DALL-E, Open AI, all the stuff you're sort of seeing with images now. Like many of you probably, I was beta testing these things over the summer. For those of you who don't know how this works, you essentially type in some text. It's called a prompt. In this case, imagine 3 buildings made out of stacked arches, et cetera, et cetera. You can include information about the aesthetics, the quality of lighting, even the size and format of the image, anything really. The isometric view versus perspective views could be included in that prompt. And then it produces 4 options for you. In this case, with Midjourney, 4 options. You could then choose and upscale an image or vary an image. And it's really an evolutionary process, just like evolutionary design, where you produce iterations of a thing, you choose the most successful ones, and then you iterate more on those, and you just continue until you achieve the result you're looking for. In this case, it would start with this kind of basic image, and then it would add more and more resolution as you go to get these kind of highly articulated fault systems in this case. So my first experiments over the summer included facades with color, different compositions of facades, even model elements, fragments of buildings, highly intricate interiors, and then even like starting to think about how buildings like houses, suburban houses might be made of sponges, things like this. You can start to combine a lot of different features and elements outside of architecture into architecture, which I think makes it interesting for us. Housing projects as sponges. Of course, I'm an architect, so I care about the control of the form and the geometry. So part of my use of this was to look at how I could start to craft prompts that would give me some kind of predictable output in terms of form. In this case, using the term camouflage, which we all know what that pattern looks like. It's grays and greens and browns. And it would start with the pattern, so it would start like what you would expect, where it would drape things with a camouflage sort of fabric. But as you iterate, as you go through this evolutionary process of going further and deeper in, the greens that were originally just part of a pattern start to become plants. The white or tan starts to become limestone, the white starts to become glass. And so the actual materiality of buildings starts to find its way into these images as you go deeper and deeper into this journey. These are just some of the results. Again, this is all early on, so this is right at the beginning of when this stuff came to be. And then, of course, trying to gain even more control over the form, I looked at letters. How can you use a letter, the shape of a letter? We all know what a C looks like or a D looks like. So using that in the prompt to start to craft actual geometries that were even more predictable. In this case, a landscape with the letter C, the letter D, J, and then even making words out of these letters. And then ultimately bringing that into 3-dimensional design. So I took that just 2D image and started to make 3-dimensional manifestations of it. So this would be a house, using that initial image as the seed to create it, with very little actually intervention on my part. There's a lot of other AI models that have been out there now. One is image to image. So the upper left corner is a house that I designed. It's actually built. That's a photograph of the project. The other 3 are all AI thinking of different iterations of the thing I built. Fortunately, I like the one I did best, but it's pretty amazing that you could sit with a client and say, all right, give me 50 versions of what I just designed, and which one do you think is working? Another one is the reverse of text to image, where you actually input an image and get the text prompt back. How does the AI read that data set and read the text that exists and the tags that exist within it? These are 2 projects that I finished. The one on the right is at the airport. So if you're at Bergstrom Airport, it's in long-term parking. It's an art installation that's a permanent piece there now. And on the one on the left is a project that wasn't built, but it was a design for a roof canopy in Florida. And so I asked AI, what are the words that you would use to create those images if I were to write a text prompt for this? And these are the words that it came up with, like super weird, things I would not predict, things I would predict, like 3D printed building maybe, or glowing crystals, but the things I would never imagine to be in the prompt, like Selena or Texas Revolution. And sure enough, like putting that text back into the AI, it produced results that were a hybrid of those 2. So the top 2 images are what the AI produced with that text, using those 2 images, and I think you can see it's fairly similar, same color, same kind of materiality and aesthetic qualities. So real quick, just finish. The last one I've been working on is this kind of outpainting technique. So with DALL-E, you can actually insert an image and then ask AI what exists outside of the frame of this image. So the little piece in the middle is something I produced in Midjourney. And the outside, everything that's kind of a pop 80s in this image is AI creating whatever it wants to create outside of my image. So using my image to produce all other results. So it's pretty amazing. Like it just makes these little things that are totally unpredictable, things I never would have imagined to be part of it. And then some final recent experiments where I'm looking at, with the later versions of text-to-image AI, it's becoming much more realistic, much more articulate. So some building examples, and then finally, I'm doing some housing clusters now that really kind of have a high level of reality to them. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have these sort of fast and fascinating introductions from each of our panelists, and then dive into some other questions. Our second speaker is an assistant professor at the School of Art. She's an artist, designer, and I learned an engineer as well, and works and creates work addressing climate change, interspecies world sharing, humane technology, and a just sustainable future. Her lab at UT explores the intersections of all of those things, art and design, technology, and biology. And she's also the co-founder and chief product officer of Peregrine Biosense, and previously was with Snappy. I highly commend a TED Talk that you can easily find that provides fascinating work. So, Shabbat.
Yes, thanks. So I probably my slides are less direct about how I've been using AI, but more how AI has inserted in the art creation process here and there. So this is Once a Glacier. It's a virtual reality film about the story of a girl and a piece of glacier ice, and how they, as the girl grows up, she has been on this futile attempt to save what was once a piece of glacier. And when we started, I wrote the story and then illustrate these into these. These are all modeled in single 4D and then rendered. These were all before Wonbo or DALL-E coming. And then later we actually put the script into this again, and DALL-E is doing as good as a job of this render. And this is a very short teaser that is background during the Inupiat tradition, glacier carry memories from the past and communicates them to themselves. And the climate crisis has become a terrifying reality that the crews are seeing the disappearing the end of the glaciers and the end of these sun districts that happen before our eyes. And then, so through this film and its interactive art, media monster, together with the girls. And some stories that while we were recording on glaciers in Alaska, I wasn't able to find the word in English to describe this chirping sound we're hearing right now. And then later found out that in indigenous cultures' language, Tagish both is the name of the tribe and also the sound of the breakup of ice. So how our language is shaping our perception. And then collaborating with Dorothy in the dance department, we turn this VR film into a live performance, augmented with the motion capture. The dancer embodies the glacier and tracing the memory of the glacier from the ice age to the Anthropocene through ice core. So this is how it looks like with the girl in life and Dorothy. And then taken on that, where the actual girl looks like, this is AI generated. So we start to generate posters with Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. This is AI generated as well. So we put the script into Midjourney and through Stable Diffusion to generate how the glacier had lived through the life from the glacial age to Anthropocene. We like that exactly it's kind of like memory and this one is about octopus and extinction. If eventually we are going to extinct due to environmental breakdown, how do we design a more elegant extinction so that the upcoming species, in this case octopus, can remember us with some tenderness and empathy? And in the first attempt, we try to embody and become octopus. We try to learn the distributed intelligence that we are not used to, where we have a central governed brain. There's also the AI as a medium part, where when we are failing to learn the becoming of another species, maybe AI can be as a medium to help. And in a similar process, we have the story and the word construct, the word building turned into paintings. And this painting is, we first put it in Wombo, and from what Wombo generated, we made this painting. That is what we imagined this world could be like from the octopus perception. Maybe they are bioengineered humans with enlarged organs specialized in their functions to adapt and survive underwater. Maybe they are octopus archaeologists scan through the remnants of the Anthropocene. Maybe they are territorial birds take advantage of the aerial ability when the world is underwater. And you may know that each octopus have, each tentacle can think on their own. They basically have 9 brains. So it's hard to vote because they can disagree from each other, even the same tentacle it's different tentacle from the same octopus. I'll skip through this over time. Talking about AI, I was a prototyping designer at Apple for the past 4 years before I joined UT, where we design a lot of interface that involve AI. For example, this is you can write on the iPad and they turn handwriting into digital text where you can copy and paste the text. And when we design this, there's a lot of questions like when the AI is making a mistake, how do we correct it? How do we tell people that this is caused by AI? What is the model being trained on? What is the different cultural and language difference? And I did a talk on discoverable design when there's AI involved. When there's machine learning involved, when things are not binary, but there's a bit of ambiguity in between. And same as the ECG on Apple Watch, when there's a probability of guessing, how do we show that? How do we ensure that it can't detect heart failure, heart attack? This is my lab, Ecocentric Future Lab, where we look at non-human intelligence. Non-human include animals, plants, mushroom, artificial intelligence, and how do we tap into each other's creativity and co-create together.
Our third speaker is Claudia Schmuckle. Claudia is the inaugural curator in charge of contemporary art and programming at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And there she develops a dynamic program of exhibitions, commissions, and acquisitions that dialogue with the institution's sites, buildings, and collections, leading to a critical reassessment of the museum's own histories and identities. She created Uncanny Valley, Being Human in the Age of AI, which was the first museum exhibition in the United States to reflect on the political and philosophical stakes of artificial intelligence. So,
thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the opportunity. For me, ground zero point of engagement with AI was really the recognition that the world was reconfigured by what I call algorithmic psyops that turned elections by feeding off people's tribal reflexes. As all of you know, a development that was really driven by statistical machines, which are today simply called artificial intelligence or AI. That was, leading up to 2016. I was also in the process of moving to San Francisco, which seemed to be a particularly fertile ground to think about these questions. And of course, it came along with the realization that this type of machine intelligence, which has traditionally been applied to decrease uncertainty in fields as diverse as climate science, healthcare, and gaming, all areas that benefit from the prediction of potential risks, wreaks havoc when it's introduced into the social sphere by augmenting uncertainty and instability. So that, was driving my inquiry as like, how had AI become so effective at reshaping reality? And given the important role of social media, e-commerce sites, search engines in this landscape, I began to think about how the problem of AI, or maybe I should say our daily encounter with it, can be thought in visual terms, as our primary engagement with it is through the screen of our computers and smart devices, if we see it at all, right? I realized that the way we see AI, or how it makes itself visible to us if it does, because as we all know, many of its mechanisms and operations are very much hidden and out of sight, seem to magnify early avant-garde visual strategies, in particular that of montage, the collision of disparate images to produce associative meaning, which led me to describe the visual manifestation of AI as we encounter it as a form of statistical montage, composed of what behaviorist B.J. Fogg termed hot triggers, that turns on its head the surrealist concept of automated writing, which can be understood as mimicking the REM state of paradoxical sleep, as one that induces a state of paradoxical wakefulness, or, if you want to describe it inversely, sort of a restless tiredness or a tired restlessness. All of this led me into a deep dive into the intellectual history of automaticity and its evolving relation to ideas of the human and intelligence, which was critical to the formation of the idea of freedom in both humanist concepts whose exceptionalism has long been debunked at this point, beginning with Sigmund Freud's radical rethinking of the uncanny as the manifestation of a form of internalized automaton. And that brings me to my second deep dive, the history of how automaticity, or the idea of artificial intelligence, has been imagined, because after all, I'm a curator focused on visual arts. Since antiquity, AI has been pictured as a humanoid robot through the 20th century, which turned out to be an enduring conceptual dynamo within the Western world that has held disparate and often opposing meanings over time that project the changing hopes and fears of societies. It still endures today, as we all know, in popular culture, even though the focus of the artistic imagination has shifted towards the disembodied representation of the thinking machine since the Second World War. Of course, one of the concepts that shows how persistent the image of the humanoid robot still is the one of the uncanny valley, a term that I trust everybody in this room is familiar with, because it was proposed by robotics expert Masahiro Mori in 1970 to describe humans' relationship to lifelike machines.
It harks back to an earlier definition of the uncanny by Ernst Jentsch, who precedes Freud, who characterized it as the mistaken recognition of an inanimate object for an animate being. Working with these dueling definitions of the uncanny and applying them to the study of machine learning, I arrived at a different definition of the uncanny valley, one that goes beyond Maury's imagination of the robotic double. This reconfigured uncanny valley incorporates the AI imaginary, the trove of images and symbols derived from the metaphors that guide and describe both the design and the operations, but also the applications of AI. And as you can see in the slides behind me that I'm sort of inconsistently running through, sorry, because I'm talking and pushing this at the same time, they range from models of collective intelligence, often drawn from the natural realm, familiar to the engineers in the room also, I'm sure, as heuristics or meta-heuristic models for thinking about the design of AI systems, to forms of excavation, mining. Really, the trope of mining has become a very important image with which artists are approaching the idea and the subject of AI to sort of render it, sort of like to render it visible. Statistical alter egos, drawing on the long history, of course, of thinking about artificial intelligence as a form of double, right? As a form of a replication of a lifelike either form, as we see in the robot, or mode of thinking, which is embodied in the term of thinking machine, which is now redefined in terms of this statistical double, if you will, a digital double, of which there are many versions out there, dispersed over stacks of different corporate entities and government entities. But sort of like within that realm, sort of like I feel that they're truly sort of like, or we're getting towards basically a new visual language of AI that sort of like comes from within and that comes from artists truly thinking and working with sort of the as I said before, the design, the operation, the mechanisms of the technology itself. And so that's really what the show was trying to do, and that's why the images that you see behind me, that sort of like those are the subjects and the motifs and the images that they try to get to and to propose a new visual language for us to think about AI that finally goes beyond this idea of the robot. So just to close, I'd like to say that this new uncanny valley is really sort of like visualized on the one hand in the operation of gradient descent, sort of whose emerging terrain and evolving borders are reshaping this human-machine relationship that Maury's original graph maps out so beautifully. So it's not limited anymore to this idea of the robot or the thinking machine, as I said before, but it's really mapped by the inscrutable calculations of algorithms that are designed to mine and analyze humans' behavior and project it into tradable futures. It's occupied by our statistical doubles, spread across stacks and reflected back to us in this ceaseless visual montage of hot triggers, which is what I call the statistical montage. And it's also like on the micro level haunted by the interpretability, or the black box problem, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is the difficulty of explaining how a particular AI has reached its conclusion. And on the macro level, it is burdened with what research scientist Ali Ramini has termed the alchemy problem of the larger field, namely the predominant reliance on trial and error in the absence of rigorous criteria for choosing one AI architecture over another. So taking all of these qualities into account, whether they're real or mythical, the uncanny valley in the 21st century is emerging as a focus of a new front of frontierism, whose sole aim is an ever deeper and more tailored capturing of our attention. Now, this was 2020. And it's interesting to sort of revisit these ideas from today's perspective, where the landscape has changed so drastically over the last 6 months. But I thought it would be helpful for you, since I'm not a maker, to sort of tell you sort of like where I'm coming from, and hopefully sort of like talk about different ideas of imaging and visual histories that we can draw upon when we talk about the challenge of generative AI. Thank you.
Thank you. Our fourth speaker is Jason Salavan, and Jason is an alum from UT. He's a fine artist and associate professor at the University of Chicago. Using software processes of his own design, Jason generates and reconfigures masses of communal material in order to present new takes on the familiar. He's been exploring AI and machine learning to see how these techniques might work with existing visual databases. His work has been shown in museums and galleries around the world, and he also, some time ago, maybe on the cusp of all of this, was a visiting artist with Microsoft Research. Jason.
Great. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks so much for the invitation. I've been excited to hear the other panelists' experiences and observations in the field. I did go to undergrad here about 30 years ago. And at the time, I was a major in studio art, and I minored in computer science. And I was writing software to make art projects in my drawing classes. And got pushed back from my faculty, but I could draw, so I got some support too. But that's to say, I had some intuitions as a young artist about the future of generativity, about the capability of using data sets to make work. So I've been sort of engaged in this space for a long time. I think when people say AI right now, they're talking mostly about neural networks, which is a specific kind of software construct that has proven very powerful. And just for table stakes, what I think of as, when I try to be specific about the future and how AI will influence art and design, I try to think specifically about how direct exploration and production, how we're going to make things in collaboration with these systems. They're autonomous, or they're sort of pseudo-autonomous, they're hybrid systems. What will we literally be doing? What will Hollywood be doing? What will all sorts of creative endeavors? And I wouldn't limit those to sort of fine art and sort of visual design. People are using these same kinds of techniques to do drug discovery, right? To work on cancer drugs. DeepMind had an incredible result where they've beaten human capacity to predict protein folding at some outrageous sort of scale. So the reason there's so much global hype around this is these neural networks have proven quite sort of apt at and able to solve all sorts of problems and explore all sorts of spaces. And to the sort of second bullet point I have here, I think this also starts to ask interesting philosophical questions about the nature of creativity. What is it to be creative when these machines, and they are truly machines, they are not imbued with magic. They're inscrutable, they're hard to figure out, they're huge, I mean, they're sort of superhumanly scaled, but they are mathematical constructions that are performing really amazing things. But they don't have life force, right? They are mechanical. They're just amazing in their scale and their capabilities already. And I think that the future will prove even more so. Just to give a little sort of quick background, my own interest and expertise is in image synthesis, that is like models that make images. So this is 2014, 9 years ago. This is the state of the art 9 years ago. This paper called Generative Adversarial Networks was a sort of milestone, made the author really famous and rich, and this is the best it could do, okay? Fast forward 4 years, you have the same basic sort of technologies now making photorealistic faces. There are lots of tricks here. There's lots of, once you dig in, it's like the faces are all aligned, the data sets are really constructed to give these results, but the results are still amazing. And now, and this is, this is just, right, a year before pandemic or so, 2 years before. And now we're at sort of these, this one, Stable Diffusion, these text-to-image models that sort of can span the really broad space of image synthesis. And so this is just to say, this is happening very quickly, certainly in visual and text. Okay. So I want to say something about, this isn't sort of, just the fun, creative art people. Apple is the largest market cap company in the world and considers itself a design company. At least that's how it sort of speaks about itself. These are a couple quotes from John Ivey. Different news, relatively easy, doing something generally better is hard, and this one, the next one's funny. Apple's goal isn't to make money. Our goal is to design and develop and bring to market good products. I only mention this just to say there are really big stakes in this space. It's not a surprise that both Google, Facebook, and Microsoft are all sort of chasing this Chat GPT stuff, right? So this is the biggest companies in the world are really, really focusing energy on making systems that generate content, that generate solutions. So we're talking about generativity. These systems make things. So again, the stakes are big. I think art, at its best is the tip of the spear for exploring. And I think we're back in that point where artists are able to sort of artists and art adjacent projects are able to take risks and do weird things. It's basically thought that right now, both Facebook and Google have a version of ChatGPT. They just can't share it because they're scared of the downside risk of all the sort of bad press and negative things. So a smaller company, OpenAI, is able to release it with less sort of blowback. So, everybody's sort of aware and present to this is something sort of transformative, at least as far as media goes. Okay, so what about me? I'll just show a couple things I've done recently in this sort of space. This is a large sort of wallpaper mounted to the photography galleries at the new Kinder building at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And it sort of represents the sort of archetypal data set of image, of training AI on images, which is called ImageNet. It's kind of outdated at this point, but it was the first real data set that was like, can we capture the entire world in a data set? And the answer is no, but you can try. And then it's sorted by category, and I spent a lot of effort trying to make the actual experience of it a meaningful and artistically valuable and aesthetic experience. So it's not sort of a random treatment of these, but sort of relates to the organization of the set itself. And it's 300,000 images at 3/4 square by 3/4 square. And I did this, I'd never done something like this before. We did this all remotely. So I did not see this until I went to the opening. Wild thing to try to do over email and Dropbox or whatever. This is probably the only time I'm going to do this, but my studio, we were making our own models, and we ended up publishing in a computer science, a major computer science conference called ICCV. So this is our custom model, and I was the senior author. And again, it was a really interesting experience to actually make a model, then try to sort of sell it to the scientific community as valuable science, which is a really interesting process that as an artist I wasn't that familiar with. I probably wouldn't do this again, but it was kind of a valuable experience. And I think the model's cool, and the model has some properties that I think will actually be useful for things like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. The last thing I want to show is completely in progress. So I'm always like nervous showing things in progress. I did a screen capture video of me working with a sort of live site that my studio is developing right now. The piece is called Totem. It will be done very soon. We think it's the biggest GIF of all time. It's 100,000 pixels by 58,000 pixel GIF, and that's one of the aspects of it. It uses all of these sorts of technologies, both GPT-3 or ChatGPT, uses Stable Diffusion, it uses lots of different things. And this is just a video of me interacting with it. It's essentially composed of over 5,000 smaller elements that are all AI rendered based on the Wikipedia. It's a pretty dense and complicated piece. It also has like a strong sort of blockchain interaction. I think I'm playing with these things critically. So these tiles are sort of sized according to the distribution of wealth in the US. So you've got massive tiles that cost a fortune and tiny tiles that cost 50 cents, literally. And the whole thing sort of uses these technologies both to represent things we're familiar with and to sort of explore the less familiar. And it's, like I said, it's a live piece, something new for me to do something sort of web-based, and it should be out pretty soon. Look forward to the conversation, and thank you guys.
Wow. We had a pre-meeting to talk about what we would talk about. The possible topics are pretty endless, I think. But there's a few themes we thought we could usefully touch on. They have to do with the nature of creativity. They have to do with the artist's role and artistry disciplines and museums, of course, and distribution of work, the process of doing art, and then some of the ownership and legal issues, the stakes, as Jason put it. So maybe we could start out with one of those topics, and an easy one is creativity, of course, and that's perhaps the first topic that a lot of people think about with respect to these technologies. What is the creative process if AI can do this? I think both Claudia's discussion of the automaticity and the rendering of the notion of what's autonomous, what's not, and the way in which many of you use the word co-creation comes up here. So I'm going to invite the panelists to talk about what generative AI does for us and how it encourages us to think about what it means to be creative, to be original in particular. Corey, would you like to start?
Sure.
I'll just jump
Yeah,
around, and please feel
sure.
free to
I think,
just offer up whatever you want.
Yeah, it is kind of the big question. I think it's the one that divides people in a significant way, whether AI can create or not create. And I think the way to look at it is not, does AI mimic what humans do? Is it a human? Does it have a life force, like Jason mentioned? It doesn't, but it does create. And I think if you look at if you approach it from the end results and work backwards, I think is a more productive way to think about it. And I think original is actually the key to that. If you think of what is original, I think very little is actually original. Like I don't know, Rosalind Krauss's book on myth of originality, or Walter Benjamin, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. I think things have changed way before with the introduction of technical means of production and making that have already gone against the idea of originality. And I think when I think of originality, I think there's kind of two different categories. One is what is new, and the other is what is novel. And something that's novel is the product of evolution, where something's changing over time. I think 99% of artists, architects are working within the novel. Very few people are actually new, which is a revolutionary way to approach art and architecture. And I don't think, like, AI will never be, at least in the current form of it, new. But it will continue, I think, the novelty that we're producing as artists and architects, and actually expand that territory much further and allow much more people access to creating within that kind of domain. But I think people who are afraid that this is taking over our jobs as artists or architects, I don't think that's possible within the category of new, like truly original work. I think that's something that will always exist outside of AI.
That's a great distinction. And in our pre-meeting, I forgot who raised this. Jason, it might have been you. Creativity with a capital C versus a lower C.
Yeah. So Corey, I agree with the basic idea, but if I was like a UI designer, I might be worried. There are lots of spaces where, we have this sort of distinction between high art and low art, or big C creativity and small C creativity. Maybe that's another way of thinking about the new and the novel. Most people make a living on the novel or on the small C. And again, we're talking about art, but doctors and lawyers should be a little worried too. There are lots of white-collar jobs that are going to look different in a very short amount of time, 10 years, 20 years. I think we'll see a landscape for employment that's significantly different. I'm speculating here, but to the other point, I do think these models, they ingest so much, especially these new ChatGPT style and DALL-E style models, ingest so much, billions of elements of text and image, but they are not inventing anything outside of what they've ingested. They are doing really complex, I think superhuman interpolations inside of the data, if that makes sense. So it's almost like impossible for these models to do things that are outside of what they've been trained on. It's just so cool the things they're able to do inside the things they're trained on. And I kind of agree that that's not new. It certainly is different. And so, it could be splitting hairs, but I do think certain kinds of employment in the arts are directly under threat, and it's like a sort of a grown-up conversation we're going to have.
I think a lot of the comments and the examples that the panelists have offered underscore these differences. And I was really struck in looking at some of your work and listening just now that regarding the challenges of some of the technical capabilities that all of you possess, especially the artists on the panel. And the question of the extent to which AI can be democratizing comes up. We've had a lot of technologies that make that claim to democratize the art process. How do you feel about it? And because a lot of the artists I know would never claim to have technical, beyond, say, drawing, expertise. They certainly wouldn't claim to have coding expertise or engineering expertise as Jiabao does. So I was wondering if does this issue of democratizing and reach, and both in terms of the artist's own capabilities, as well as our capabilities to engage this art. Jiabao, would you like to?
I guess here, democratizing, it's increasing accessibility. The people who haven't been trained as experts of the field can get into the field super quick. A person who doesn't have been trained to be an illustrator can generate storyboard and illustration super fast. And that has been demonstrated in a lot of the work that we've been making as well. Our developers has been generating storyboards, and we make film out of them. Yeah, and I kind of want to go back to the originality part. I think it's not a binary, it's a spectrum instead. There's the part where things are generative, if based on pre-existing work is more derivative, and then there's a part where it's totally new, we haven't seen it ever, and they are the first people who are making it. And I think by far the AI that we've been seeing are around about this part, the middle left part of that spectrum, probably. And also there's always discussion about what is creativity, will it take over existing jobs whenever there's new technology coming in. When camera started, people don't think making photo is art, but then later we have photography as a fine art form. When we have digital softwares, at first digital drawings are not considered to be in museum, or video are not, or filmmaking are not a form of art, but later it becomes. So I think in to some extent, AI will become a new paintbrush, just like how camera or software, Photoshop has become a new paintbrush for artists. And there will be artists who is on that spectrum, who is pushing the limits, pushing the boundaries of AI and make that work. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may build on that, because my thought process goes along the same lines. I feel that that most expert artists, as you just described, are unlikely to use generative AI in a one-to-one fashion. Right? They will engage with it conceptually to push the boundaries of the technology, as you just mentioned, or to recontextualize the outcome, sort of in a broader critical discourse. And most likely will only use it as one among many, many, many other tools that sort of creatively and critically engage these technologies. I mean, so that's where I feel we'll probably see a distinction, between how artists or sort of think and work with the technology versus maybe people who are not sort of critically engaging with the history of representation and the field of visuality. I mean, that would be one thing, because anybody who's interested in the history of representation and the history of image making is actually going to be pretty bored pretty quickly with the capacities, I think, and the look of of the images that a single image or even a series of images that DALL-E or Midjourney or Stable Diffusion can create. So I think in some ways also the sort of artistic frontier of these technologies, I feel is like boredom, right? And that's where we will see a lot of new sort of like methodologies emerge that we cannot even necessarily grasp right now.
I think to connect that to the idea of like professionalization and professions, what's happening to those, I think it's the democratization is really interesting, because it's also, for an artist who is an expert, opening new territory. Like, we're working with billions of images now, references that we might not be familiar with because we grew up under a certain academic mold, and we weren't exposed to these other kind of histories or cultures or territories. So I think it does open that up for us in terms of expanding our expertise and how to incorporate that in our work. But I also think like it's a really important thing to consider, because professions are essentially, we've agreed as a society that a certain group of people have control over a certain set of things that we do, whether it's lawyers or doctors or whatever, and we base that kind of contract based on their expertise and training. So lawyers are trained a certain amount, then they have experience in a certain area. But with AI, those kind of disappear, because all the training is sort of immediate, and the experience, maybe we could say, is nuanced. Like an experience that we feed the computer is different than one where you take it from one context to another context. But no matter what, no matter how you see it, I think the walls around professions are dissolving. And I think that every profession, especially architecture, but like you say, like medicine and law, will have to come up with a different way of encircling what they do, what value they provide for society. I mean, I think we'll see where that goes.
Universities too, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that a major issue for universities right now?
Yeah.
In terms of rethinking the methodologies of application processes,
That's
et cetera.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jason?
I agree with everything that's been said. I would add that one of the interesting opportunities for the democratization of these tools, especially I'm thinking like visual culture more broadly, filmmaking, things like that, is that, I have an 8-year-old daughter. I think by the time she's 15, she'll be able to make things that would have cost millions of dollars 10 years ago. I'm not kidding. So that's pretty cool. Like what will the world look like when every teenager has the opportunity to make special effects extravaganzas that, cost studios millions of dollars 10 years ago, or create these experiences. So I think in the sort of mediascape, in the sort of the world of moving images and things like that. The things are exciting. There's downside to all of this, but the other thing I would say is that I agree that these Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, all these models actually get sort of boring and have kind of like once the novelty wears off. But again, we are at this is a cheesy thing, but we are at the end of the beginning. We're nowhere. We're just starting. So the ability to add controls to these things, and I know companies like Adobe and young startup rivals are really interested in how to give artists control over these things. So you're not just typing a thing and you're getting a result. You're actually saying, no, I want the arm to be like this, and so the kinds of interactions between sort of traditional design techniques, traditional 3D graphics techniques, things like that, and these AI is where you'll have, I think, new kinds of artists bloom, right? Artists that have a real kind of intuitive understanding for what AI models do and what they're capable of and how to push those, and then how to tell a story that way, or how to make sort of a human connected experience. So I think we have to have some imagination about not just where we are right now, but given the sort of vector of motion, like given how fast things are moving, what happens when we have more control, and what happens when really talented people who have been steeped in this since they were children, since they were babies, they're now running the show sort of creatively. And the fine art world is one thing, but I think the visual culture is something where these things sort of are intractably built. I think these things are going to happen, and it will change our experience of film, and it will change our experience of music, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you're leading so nicely to something I hoped we would have a chance to cover, and that has to do with how the notion of design and the notion of the sites of circulation and exhibition, how those will be changing as well. The playfulness that some of the work that you shared here is just phenomenal. Where do people see that? Where will we engage it? How will we engage it? And what does it mean for the ways that, for those of you who are working with young artists, how does that change our educational demands? Xiaobao or Claudia, I was thinking about you with respect to the spaces in particular.
Yeah, I think we'll just see a much greater fluidity all around. I mean, it's something, Jason touched upon. I mean, in terms of the formation of, image makers, visual culture, or culture producers across the board. I mean, we already see that sort of like in the early generation of artists who have engaged with AI, which probably is the group that I showed behind, but that is now becoming much more prevalent, that, you approach your studies from a much more expansive perspective, and you don't just want to study the history of art or art, but, at the same time, you want to study computer science and, engineering. And I think what we will see is a demand of younger generations for the erosion of some of the disciplinary boundaries that are still quite prevalent within academic systems and beyond. I mean, I'm not just talking about academia, but also in museums. Yeah. I mean, if I think about how museum departments are structured, it's completely anachronistic. So, so I will see that, that there will be a challenge in that respect, and a demand that institutionally we will have to address that is becoming ever larger.
What's maybe exciting is that we might actually see like real cross-disciplinary work for the first time. I mean, we've all talked about it, and it's a really important thing, but now, we're just talking, like I can go into ChatGPT and say, write me a Python script that does this and this and this. I don't know Python, I'm not a computer scientist, but I can now apply that to my work in a way that is meaningful, that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And so it's a cross-disciplinarity, but without other people. So yeah. It's now working with the AI to bridge those different
So you don't think you'll need a team, as it were? Because
what?
A team to work with.
It's so funny because in architecture, that's what we do. We form teams. We have structural engineers, we have civil engineers. Everyone's part of this team, and we tend to be the generalists who are able to combine everything. But our field has really diverged into hyper specialization. Like there are people who do very specific things, like I'm a curtain wall designer, or I do only, facades or whatever, or only hospitals. And maybe that actually trajectory can reverse, and we can start, even within our own discipline, start to open back up into being collaborators again with other fields. Some of that might be AI, some of it might be other humans, but I think there's a potential of getting out of these silos that we've built for ourselves and moving back into a discourse that's more shared.
And speaking of team, I think ChatGPT is allowing us to talk to the people in the past. Like, for example, I'm writing a book on trans-species design, interspecies co-creation, and I want to argue with DALL-E and Nietzsche about their view of animals and the intelligence of animals. And I've been training this ChatGPT to become DALL-E, and DALL-E has been notoriously thinking animals as automata, and they don't have intelligence, they don't have souls, and then arguing with him on co-creation, that's like mind-blowing. And like you can even like ask Nietzsche to write a play in the voice of Shakespeare and then draw it in the style of Miyazaki, and like playing things like that. Yeah. Like expand your team beyond the living people right now.
So that really suggests that the opportunity to use some of these tools has changed the way you approach your work. Do you see some other, have you personally felt challenged by some of these technologies? Did they encourage you to acquire new skills or to go into some subfields or adjacent fields that were unexpected for you?
I've learned a lot more math than I would have expected. My father was a painter. I grew up painting and drawing, and so, but I had some orientation towards science as a kid, and I sort of, like I said, it's been a long time that I've been interested in writing software to make art, but there's this argument about, well, is this really new, and what's, is this that big a deal? So when I was at Microsoft Research in 14, 15, this stuff was just getting started, and they were very engaged. And the team that invited me out there ended up at Facebook, and now they're like a big part of Facebook AI, and Facebook is one of the, among the 2 best AI entities in the world, or 3 or whatever, however you want to speak of it. And I would say that these recent results, just from my personal perspective, do feel like a threshold crossing. Like there's something qualitatively different that we're getting to. And it may mostly be based on scale and based on some little tweaks to techniques, but however we got there, there's something, does feel to me that we've sort of crossed something that whether we call it new or novel, whether we call it big C or little c, there's something different than sort of what I've been witnessing for the last 8, 9 years.
Yeah. In design school, a lot of students have this habit of have a design brief, opening Pinterest, find inspirations, make something that is a derivative of those mood boards. And I've been telling students that if you do that, you're going to be obsolete. You're going to be replaced. Because that's, in a way, how AI works, and they can do better than you. They can generate so many different variations that you.
Before we turn to the audience, because I'm guessing you have a lot of questions that you would like to ask here, I was hoping we could speak at least briefly about any of the risks associated with some of these technologies. Jason, you brought up the idea of the stakes, and the companies, certainly in a lot of good systems research, we're well aware of some of the potential vulnerabilities that could come with control over extremely powerful apparatuses that are really accountable to nobody other than a profit, a bottom line of profitability. I was wondering if you see any risks associated with the generative AI technologies and how you think about that.
I do, actually. So if we think about attention, our attention being the coin of the realm for Google, Facebook, Amazon, et cetera, and TikTok, and that these companies have gotten really good at getting our attention with like what I would call kind of light AI. You know, TikTok has a very sort of mysterious and highly regarded algorithm for keeping kids engaged. But it's not exactly this sort of AI. And I think about adding these sorts of tools to the mix as being like a source of concern, especially, you know, my own little sort of pet concern is targeted advertising. So, you know, when my kid is a teenager and is on these networks, I expect she'll have ads that aren't just like picked from a bin and handed to her, but they're literally generated specifically for her from scratch using all of the cookies and metadata and browsing history and all of the things that are sort of tracked, such that, you know, perhaps these targeted ads are just irresistibly good and are just hit us right in that one spot that we didn't even know we had. So the way models are trained, the model just has to like win the task, and if the task is to keep someone keep their attention, the models will just try everything in its sort of arsenal to succeed. And so I'm a little concerned about a kind of amoral deployment of these models to hijack attention in ways that we have not experienced yet.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, you know, there's other risks, or maybe we should call it damage already, right? That have already been widely reported and that are well known, you know, on the back end of the creation of these technologies. And that's one of the, you know, big areas where we need to see change, and yet I don't think that we know exactly how to effect that change, because the proposition is so vast and large and requires such resources that that it is impossible to solve. You know, certainly on the level of the individual, but maybe not even fall into the capacities of, let's say, a major university like UT, since it's all in the hands of basically 6 global corporations. So, I mean, if you've been following the news at all, you know, will know that there is great upset amongst, you know, creators, for example, about sort of like their work just being subsumed into the data pool without any acknowledgement or compensation. You know, sort of there's the ghost labor of every creative that has ever posted anything online that is now feeding those tools. And, you know, one has yet to configure ways of acknowledging maybe that debt, that humongous debt that these tools are built upon. But then, you know, more perturbingly also on a deeply humane level, the success of ChatGPT, and, you know, let's talk about that for a second, and why it actually is still active and didn't disappear within hours from the internet like Tay did, you know, a few years ago, is because OpenAI is employing, you know, legions of laborers in Kenya whom they're paying $2 an hour to do the kind of content correction that is needed for us to use these tools without being exposed to vile and deeply disturbing and potentially harming content. And of course, what's happening on that end, which is a perverse sort of perpetuation of, you know, if you will, colonialist structures, is precisely that these people are now reported to experience great harm as a consequence of their employment. And obviously, if we're talking about ethical systems, if we're talking about good systems, Sharon, you know, that is obviously a major area of concern that, you know, one has to think about how it could be potentially addressed moving forward.
Yeah.
Also, like the financial model and regulation side, when social media come out, we've seen that it's not being thoughtfully designed and made and regulated, and then there's this model of targeted ads, but there's also the model of subscription where the people who pay get to see better content. The people who can't pay have to look at advertisement. And when it comes to DALL-E and Midjourney, the model already started. Midjourney, if you pay, you can have ownership of the thing you generated, and if you don't pay, it go back to the pool. You don't have the ownership, and your image belongs back to the pool, and there's no privacy out of that. And so what is the financial model built around this? And can AI even become a public infrastructure that is free to all? Yeah.
I'd add one other thing, which is, AI is really good at very specific tasks. Like if you have a ton of x-rays of lungs, it can find cancer before a doctor can. It's really not good actually at the creative precision or creative truth, I guess we could call it, which is, if you have ChatGPT write an essay, there will be errors within that essay, like citation errors, facts that are just wrong, and it's not good at highlighting those and identifying those, but we take it because it's from AI as truth and as correct, which is really problematic. An example in architecture is when you generate an image, oftentimes, you ask for a building and you get a watermark that says shutterfly across the front of it. And AI just thinks that's part of a building because there are so many images of buildings that have shutterfly written on them. Windows, doors, shutterfly, watermarks, it's all part of it, and it doesn't know. It can't distinguish between them. So if we're not careful, then yeah, it can be very problematic what gets into our final outputs.
Well, at this juncture, let's turn it over to you. Are there some questions? We have some microphones available so that we are recording this, and with the microphone, we can hear what you are saying. So Stacy is going to run some of the microphones around.
Hello, and this kind of leads from everything y'all were just saying, but the question that I've had this whole time, or for the past few minutes, is what are the role of artists or anyone in your respective fields in terms of the creation or construction of data sets? And I guess to that end also, how might we think about how to be critical about what's included and what's not included? Since, as was indicated earlier, what you're able to produce is going to be restricted to or limited by what was included in the data set in the first place. So how do we really, especially train students to think about what is included and what's not included, and who created those data sets? Or is there a bigger role people can play in the data sets that they're using in other ways?
Yeah, I can go first. When I create Once a Glacier, for example, I learned that there are so many indigenous culture are not documented via written text. So much of the culture in Inupiaq, Eskimo, those are oral. They are passed down by generation and generation. And those are not included in the model of ChatGPT. So if you want to say, ChatGPT, write me a poem about glacier or tell some story about the culture, then you probably get a very little information from that. And also, it is based on the model of human experience and human written text. So things about other species are not included.
Yeah, to expand on that, absolutely. I mean, the data sets represent a very specific worldview, predominantly Western, predominantly patriarchal, predominantly colonialist still. So, and obviously there have been attempts to sort of correct that on the backhand, which takes the intervention of humans again. My biggest hope and desire, of course, would be precisely for artists and cultural producers to actually be involved in the creation of these data sets down the line. I mean, I think, for many that would be, or the humanities in general, basically sort of like, that's where the ethical check comes in, that's what we would like to see down the line. And I think some companies are already moving in that direction, that they really realize and understand sort of the catalytic role that artists, designers, architects, the social sciences in general can play, sort of win that and should play. But of course, at the moment, sort of like we are not in control, right? So there's no straight up answer. The answer is yes, you should be involved in those conversations. In an ideal sense, artists would be co-producers of those tools because they would go in and, sort of provide a critical framework for testing before they get released. But, there needs to be some change in sort of like corporate culture, I guess, to really and truly think with artists on those terms.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, yeah, to me, this is the most exciting territory when we start to create our own data sets. And I should have mentioned Stable Diffusion more often because that's an open system that people can start to connect to. But it's going to be, I think, really exciting when artists start to tag images with their own words. So maybe door is not door, but it's some other word you've created so that you can start to call on those kind of features when you create your own images. You can call on a very specific kind of door if you know the tag for that particular thing. And then artists can start to collaborate and share their new languages they've developed. And those might be more, sensitive and appropriate. And they would create a new kind of collaboration that exists only within the creation of those data sets, which would be pretty exciting.
I'm also excited when we can feed like animal sounds into AI and train this AI that can converse with animals that human can't and can't understand. And what would they talk about? In the world of that, will us be irrelevant if they can talk with each other and think about new things?
Is there another question?
Yeah, hi. Jason, this one's specifically for you. You had mentioned that, I'll stand up. Okay. You had mentioned that you trained your own model for one of your pieces, and you said that you would not do that again.
Oh, I didn't, that's not what I meant. I absolutely would. I've been building data sets and training models for a while now, but what I wouldn't do again is try to be the senior author on a publication that we're trying to get into a big conference. That's the thing I wouldn't do again. I would absolutely make my own model. I would absolutely make my own data sets, but I wouldn't try to sell it to scientists as science. And it was a really cool experience, but and I would be on papers. I would definitely absolutely collaborate with other scientists on papers that I'm not the senior author, where it's essentially my funding and my sort of, my name on it. It was a cool experience, but I'm an artist. And
So the hurdle for you is not creating the model for the art, but rather all of the politics around being on a paper.
Yeah, and it's just a different, there are things that the dance between art and science has more overlap than I would have expected, but you make a model to make an interesting image or video, and there are tests, other models you run it through to prove how good the images are, right? So you have to actually sort of, and even this is a sort of dirty secret, but everybody inside knows the tests are dumb. Like the eye is still the best way to sort of determine a quality of one of these generated images, but you get an FID score and a good score will help you get into a big conference. So, we're running, basically artistic things through models to prove that they're, state of the art. Those kinds of dances were probably things I'm not interested in at least leading.
Understood.
That also says something, not to hijack your question at all, but that says something about how disciplines talk or don't communicate very well.
Absolutely. I have another question real quick for Claudia. What types of, you said that artists that are using kind of Midjourney and DALL-E like one-to-one, it gets boring very quickly. What types of things would you be curating or looking for in an artist to put in your museum?
What I was saying is it gets boring for the artists first. I'm eternally curious to see how artists are using these tools for their own sort of like purposes. And so, just like I did with this exhibition Uncanny Valley, I'm paying attention as to, what comes out of that engagement, and again, sort of like how it really can tell us a story about how the history of visuality is shifting, right? The history of representation is shifting, and how artists are working with these tools. So, we're still at such an emerging state, I feel, that I'm just in a position of sort of paying close attention to see what the outcome is, and you know, hopefully maybe in a couple of years, because I feel that, you know, it's in a way too soon to make an exhibition about it right now. But the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years, we'll see a major shift change. And I want to be there and, you know, and sort of take charge of that at that particular moment.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question to Claudia? How will it disrupt curation when AI is so good at taking so much data, taking art history into account, and come up with a concept with a curation description?
I guess we'll see. So I'm not really too worried about it because, again, at least at this stage, you know, ChatGPT, which I did, by the way, query about its definition of creativity just out of sheer curiosity, is still working from within, you know, a data set that is rather mainstream, right? Even if it's vast and probably quite deep in certain areas of inquiry, it's still something that sort of like trends towards, you know, the most widely published research areas, the most deeply researched research areas. And so, you know, there's not so much room or that is being explored around the margins, let's say. And the margins is what I'm interested in. So I will definitely use it because it's just to sort of explore what those margins are, just like you did. I mean, you know, probing, like asking all these probing questions and sort of trying to approach them from many different angles. But again, sort of like weaving ideas together in unexpected and potentially, you know, experimental ways is not the strength of ChatGPT, and that's where I hope that I can still flex my curatorial muscle a little bit.
No, one more? Okay.
Hi. So I have a background in working between art and science, and I have to say I've heard several times before, if there were artists in the room, then it would be better, which I don't disagree with, so I will say. But I do notice that something like AI and development of data sets in science and these things, they're growing so massively at a massive pace in a distributed way, not necessarily in one place. Maybe I don't know how my data set's going to be used later, et cetera, et cetera. If you assume we're living in an environment where all of these things are happening at a massive distributed level and out of our control, what do you think the curriculum would be what do you think the foundational values or ability to assess like one's work or purpose in the world? What do you think the ideal curriculum would be for a student, maybe like a new high school curriculum or the new foundational undergraduate curriculum? Like, what do you think those foundational core things are that we need to be working in a world using AI?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Wow, we're ending with just a little modest question. I'm a college professor, so I've thought a little bit about this. I definitely think that reciting facts is going to not be that useful. I don't think that's going to be what we want to teach students, like the rest of the sort of memorization of and the sort of regurgitation of just raw facts. I was thinking about that there was a day when calculators weren't allowed in math and science classes. You could not bring a calculator because that was cheating. Now it's just assumed that you can bring calculators, you can do all these things. So at some level we have to assume that like the resources that students bring to bear on their learning have really, really broadened and now have broadened to the point where you can get a reasonable essay out of ChatGPT that would work certainly at the high school level. So then what we ask kids to do otherwise? Do we ban them? Like, this is one approach. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems like a very short-sighted, how are you going to ban this? The horse has left the barn. It's on. It's happening. You know, I mean, I don't know. I'm definitely not, well, I'm a professor. I'm definitely not sort of an expert in sort of where education needs to go. But I do think that more fundamental things like critical thinking and problem solving in a more generalized way seem to be the things that we should be really focusing on. And then, you know, I'm really interested in kids being empathetic and how do we teach people to be more empathetic with each other and more generous. So there's sort of values that I'm really interested in too. But, you know, if I was teaching algebra or if I was teaching sort of like high school level English and having people sort of read the canon and write essays, I think that's an interesting problem to solve. I don't have the answer to that one.
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't know about general curriculum. I would say more liberal arts, humanities, but that I would have said that before AI anyway. I think for me, it's more how do we deal with it now in the classroom, because people are good, kids are using it now to write papers, essays, and I don't think it's a Cold War we can win. I don't think like Turnitin and just constantly updating your Turnitin subscription to try to find AI papers is valuable or useful at all. So, I mean, I saw recently Timothy Morton, a philosopher, posted that the way he's going to deal with it is have students write their essay in ChatGPT, and then write a new essay that's a revision of that essay, and then a third essay that explains why they revised it in the way they did. And I think that's actually a pretty good way to approach it. Like, use the tool, but understand it constructively and understand where it's failing, and then how do you fix those failures, and then draft something that's a collaboration between the two. I think that's going to become a pretty useful capability.
I was teaching interspecies co-creation class last semester. I think next semester, there will be a big AI part where you have to co-create with the AI. All your assignments have to be done together with some sort of AI, and compete with each other. And you have to be special out of it. It can't be anything else you see on the internet already. And so that's like in the art and design curriculum, there can be courses that are specifically designed for people to push the boundaries of AI. Yeah.
I really don't have much to add because I feel like you have already sort of summarized the ideas. But so I would agree with Jason, critical thinking and problem solving, because the one thing that gets lost, sort of like when we use these tools, is sort of an awareness of the history of ideas, right? Mm-hmm. And so if there's a way that we can introduce that early on in a curriculum, that at least provides some sort of framework. And of course, we're talking about the histories of ideas, right? Because there's not just one. And, and incorporate sort of expansive ways of thinking about life, about intelligence, about whatever you want to explore. But I feel like that probably would be most beneficial in terms of preparing students for this type of co-production, which I love the idea of, yeah.
Before I let our panelists go, I wanted to give them an opportunity to share just one or two sentences that could respond to a call for action. What do you think is most important for us to think about, or a way to respond to this newest wave of AI tools? It's up to you, Corey.
Am I first? Okay.
Yeah.
This is kind of a philosophy I've taught for a decade now, but I believe we should approach, especially in our fields, like creative fields, all work as improvisational, so that we're always saying and to whatever comes our way. We're always building on things and not rejecting new things that come through. So AI, I treat the same way. Like, why fight it? Let's bring it on board, adapt with it, and continue that together.
Use it. It's already there. It's going to be disruptive. Use it to your advantage. Expedite. Use it as a brainstorm buddy, or expedite your work pipeline. The old way of working is going to change soon. The software you're going to work in is going to be explicit soon. So that's on the designer side, and then I hope to see a huge use in healthcare and education, which are one of the biggest depressing problem we have now. There are still schools that don't have teachers, or there's teacher that sick and then student come, there's no teacher. And if AI can help augment us in education. And there's also doctors, nurses. There are questions that can be quickly answered, but an augmented doctor can help with that.
Claudia?
I mean, I agree. I mean, like, don't fight it, right? But I think the most important thing is to approach it with this kind of deep awareness of all aspects that inform these systems' creation and circulation. Take advantage of it to the extent that it is useful and meaningful in your work. Try to influence and shape it to the extent that that is currently possible, and hopefully in the future will be more possible, so that that we can assume some sort of ownership. You know, maybe UT can actually, you know, help with the sort of like solving this problem that we right now have of unacknowledged sort of ownership when it comes to the creative output. It would be fantastic if you could sort of make visible the distribution of influence, I guess, of visual history within data sets. But I mean, the implications are so huge and so general and so systemic that I really think the most important thing is just to engage with these technology consciously, and rather than trying to hide or run away from that.
So I've made a number of predictions about, you know, what will happen with Hollywood film or whatever, or kids and new cool apps. The truth is I have no idea what's going to happen. My intuition is that these technologies will be highly disruptive to labor and maybe to some personal dignity for people. And I think we need to be really empathetic and generous with one another in handling the kinds of changes to people's sort of work identities that might come out of this. And I think things like universal basic income will become a more common conversation. And I think we need to be open to that. I do think, you know, big changes are coming, and obviously, as is the case with all these things, no one can actually predict what these changes will be.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank our panelists.